Everyone, and welcome to the Boys and Girls in the Boat, Ithaca's amazing history of competitive rowing. I'm Janelle Ulfstad-Matson, Communications Coordinator for Friends of Stewart Park. This presentation is the third in the FSP Centennial Series, celebrating 100 years of Stewart Park. Let me first thank Natasha Bratkowski as our technical coordinator for this event. Natasha joins us from Flair Strategic Communications, a marketing and PR company based in Ithaca that works with small businesses and nonprofits. If you'd like to learn more about her work, feel free to visit ithacaflair.com. Natasha?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the intro, Janelle. And as Janelle said, I will be the tech coordinator for today's event. So I just wanted to quickly go over some of the features of Zoom Webinar in case this is your first time using Zoom Webinar. There are a couple ways that you can engage with all of us today. So firstly, you'll notice that there's a Q&A box. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation that you would like answered, please put those questions in that box. And then we will answer those as time allows, and hopefully we can get to all of those great questions. And then the chat box you will see, you have the ability to send a chat message just to the panelists, which is ourselves. If you're noticing any mic issues, or if you just want to point anything out that might be helpful, we always appreciate it. And if you would just like to share a comment or say hello, you can chat with all the panelists and attendees, and we will all see those chat messages. And finally, just so you are aware, once we get into the presentation, we will have it set to gallery speaker view. So what that means is that you will have a divider in between the presentation and the speakers, and you have the ability as an attendee to drag the divider if you want the presentation to be bigger or the speakers to be smaller. You have that control, just so you are aware. And we are testing out our automated live captions tonight. These are automated, so they may not be perfect, but assuming our diction is clear, they will be sufficient. So we hope you find that helpful. And that's all from me for now.
Thank you, Natasha. FSP, Friends of Stewart Park, is revitalizing Stewart Park and the Cayuga Waterfront Trail in partnership with the City of Ithaca for the enjoyment of Ithaca residents and visitors to our community. Tonight, we're celebrating 2021 restoration of the exterior of the Cascadilla Boathouse, Stewart Park's only building on the National Registry of Historic Places and a fine example of shingle-style architecture. FSP created the interpretive panel, Competitive Rowing on Cayuga's Waters, Camaraderie, Character, and Champions, which we'll be talking about tonight. Later on in the program, Andrea will tell you a little bit more about how you can help in the mission by joining the Mayor Stewart Centennial Challenge. I'd like to thank our sponsors for tonight. We have gold level sponsors, Tompkins Trust Company, a part of this community for more than 180 years, offering innovative financial solutions with a personal touch of a community bank. Tompkins Trust is sponsoring the exhibit that will be on Stewart Park in the Tompkins Center for History and Culture later this summer. And Cargill Salt, based in Ithaca, New York. Cargill Salt is a trusted salt supplier to many industries, offering complete salt portfolio, as well as two new gold level sponsors that joined us this week, Bousquet Holstein, PLLC, and Wegmans. I'd like to also thank our contributing sponsors, Hancock Esterbrook LLP, La Terrell, Parktex, Tatum Engineering, City Harbor, M&T Bank, CSP Management, and the Home Depot. They make all these events possible. Steve?
The Cayuga Waterfront Trail offers year-round delights to users. From late March through early November, one of Ithaca's most wonderful waterfront experiences is the sight of competitive rowers plying the waters of Cayuga Inlet and the lake. The rower's graceful synchronized motion belies the high level of fitness and coordination required in this, the ultimate team sport. Through constant and often grueling training, mile upon mile, through all kinds of weather, erratic winds, and mercurial waters, a crew strives to row together as one in a singular elusive motion known as swing.
Of course, we are grateful tonight to be joined by some of Ithaca's biggest rowing champions. I would like to welcome our panel for tonight. Drew Tennant is an assistant men's rowing coach at Cornell and a member of the board of directors of the Cascadilla Boat Club. He started rowing in the fall of 2000 as a freshman at Cornell and was a 3-year letter winner for lightweight men. After getting his coaching start at Cascadilla Boat Club, he spent 5 years at Community Rowing in Boston, where he led an urban outreach rowing program and coached adaptive programs for athletes with physical and cognitive impairments. He returned to Ithaca in 2017 with his wife, Amy, a native Ithacan, and 2 children, Cora and Will. He still rows whenever he can and is a yearly competitor in the head of Charles Regatta. Becky Robinson. In the 27 years as head coach of the women's rowing in Ithaca College, Becky Robinson has led the Bombers to consistent medals at New York State Championship Regatta, 19 NCAA championship appearances, and 2 NCAA championship titles in 2004 and 2005. Robinson rowed for the Bombers in 1985 through 1987, and she went on to train at the elite level, earning a spot on the U.S. national team in 1991. She was the first member of the crew program to be inducted into the Ithaca College Athletic Hall of Fame, and Robinson has contributed to the development of several elite level athletes, including in Para Worlds, Pan Am, and Olympic athletes and medalists. Bruce Fabens has been involved with the Cascadilla Boat Club since 2000, when his older son started rowing as a novice. With his confirmation that his son would not feel encroached upon, Bruce took the adult Learn to Row course and next summer and started getting involved. From participating in the parent side of the regatta, planning to becoming the club's co-president for a number of years, he has worked on the boat and boat repairs and maintenance, as well as rowing for years and counting. Andrew Byrnes. I think I mispronounced your name, Andrew. Can you get on and tell us how to pronounce it again? I apologize.
Hey there, it's Byrnes. Yep.
Thank you. You told me that and I just spaced it. Andrew Byrnes is a 2-time Olympic medalist, having won gold in 2008 and silver in 2012 Olympic Games as part of the Canadian men's 8. A dual citizen, he was born in Canada but grew up in Ithaca, attending Boynton and Ithaca High School. His rowing career began at the age of 17 while rollerblading through Stewart Park. Former CBC coach Rogovitz noticed his height and stopped Andrew and convinced him to try the sport. Caryn Davies was just 12 years old when the same Rogie scouted her at a local supermarket and recruited her to row for the Cascadilla Boat Club. Almost 6 feet tall already, she clearly possessed a potential to be a successful oarswoman. 4 years and 4 inches later, Caryn rowed her first national team. She went on to row 3 Olympics, earning 3 Olympic medals, 2 of them gold. Caryn is currently training for the Tokyo 2021 Olympic Games. Our other special guests are panelist Steve Stowe, who you heard earlier. He's the director of Trip Hammer Arts and a fine opera singer, performer, promoter, and importantly, organic farmer in his beautiful farm overlooking Cayuga Lake. And our technician, Natasha Bratkoski, is also a performer and a classical and musical theater works in upstate New York. Her favorite roles include Ado Annie in Trip Hammer Arts production of Oklahoma, Mac/Mabel in Precious Nonsense at the Auburn State Theater, and Servilla in La Clemcita di Tito at Ithaca College. And finally, Rick Manning. Rick is the co-founder of Friends of Stewart Park and has been its executive director since 2011. Rick led the effort to research, design, and install the rowing interpretive panel that's in the Crew Cove Overlook. Special thanks to Cornell coach Todd Kennett, Ithaca coach Dan Robinson, and researcher and writer Deirdre Cunningham, graphic designer Todd Edmonds of Iron Design, and AccuFab for the sign stand and iconic oar sculpture. And now, without further ado, we bring you the boys and girls in the boat.
Thank you, Janelle. What an intro, my Lord. I'm just going to do a very brief little look at the inlet before rowing, just because it's a really interesting history. Everything in upstate New York kind of a lot of the development begins with the Erie Canal, the changes that occurred here in the early 19th century. 1825, the canal was developed, and Ithaca was part of the Cayuga Seneca branch of the Erie Canal, and that economically changed everything here in Ithaca. You can see this 1830s Walton image from West Hill overlooking East Hill, which is a pasture at that time and a woodland. And if you zero into what became Renwick Park and then Stewart Park in 1921, you can see this is part of the canal era. We didn't have towpaths. We had steamboats that towed packet boats and barges in and out of Ithaca, taking salt down to Pennsylvania, coal up north, and agricultural products in both directions. This is a shot right at Steamboat Landing where the farmer's market is now. It's been manipulated a lot, but that's essentially we call the farmer's market at Steamboat Landing. And this is the Frontenac, probably our best known steamboat of that era. And right where I'm sitting right now in the airplane factory off of Brindley Street was where the Tabor Boat Yard was located. And a lot of boats canal boats were constructed at this time, and in many other areas along the canal. And wouldn't you know, this kind of strange, long, skinny boat appeared in 1875 or so, and I think the West Enders must have been wondering what was going on. And with that, Natasha will do a little overview of our rowing history, and then we'll get on with Drew. Natasha?
In 1873, Cornell University began its rowing program as part of a national trend after the Civil War. Harvard and Yale were dominant until Cornell, after only 2 years of training, won its first intercollegiate championship in 1875 and again in 1876, helping to brand this upstart rural land-grant college as a legitimate Ivy League institution. Inspired by Cornell, Cascadilla Preparatory School constructed the beautiful shingle-style Cascadilla Boathouse on Renwick Park's, now Stewart Park's, lakeshore, and operated its rowing program from 1894 to 1924. Ithaca College's rowing program began in 1968, and Cascadilla Boat Club, established in 1977, runs its community rowing program out of the historic Cascadilla Boathouse. Collectively, Cornell, Ithaca College, and Cascadilla Boat Club have a remarkable record of achievement, unmatched by other Ithaca sports, having produced Olympic medalists and champions at the regional, state, and national levels. Equally significant, more than 500 rowers participate in Ithaca's various rowing programs each season, learning the value of teamwork and endurance, while making rowing one of the city's largest sporting programs.
Drew, welcome.
Okay, well, I'm here to talk about Cornell rowing. We'll start with the early history, and we've got about 150 years of tradition to talk about. And while I could probably read a list that would last all night of championship crews and individuals, I figured it'd be more interesting to tell a few stories about some of our crews who I think kind of exemplify the Cornell spirit and what Cornell rowing is all about. So the first of them was, like we mentioned, that 1875 crew. Here we got the 1876 crew pictured. One interesting thing here to notice is that is a six-man shell. Typically they row, these days we row an 8-person shell with a coxswain, but in those days they just rowed a 6 and there was no coxswain. So one of the rowers had a rudder connected to their foot that they could steer while rowing. So just a little piece of history there. But we'll go to the next slide. So yeah, here we are, the 1896 crew under a welcome back arch. And as mentioned, they were seen as upstarts and underdogs. And this is kind of a recurring theme with Cornell. No one expected them to win. They were seen, the team at the time had very little funding. They were scrapping together to get boats and to pay for the trip to nationals. They came and it was such an upset to Yale and Harvard, the favorites of the regatta, that those two teams actually boycotted the regatta the next year. So that they could focus on the Harvard-Yale only regatta, to which Cornell was not invited. And that boycott lasted 107 years until they finally returned to the national championship regatta in 2003. Cornell would go on to win 13 titles over the next 16 years. So I think they got the better of that one. Go to the next slide. And then that brings us to Charles Courtney. So from 1890 to 1920, Cornell crew was guarded by Charles Courtney. He was legendary for being a strict taskmaster, instilling discipline and ruling over kind of every aspect of the crew's life, both on and off the water. He had rules for eating and drinking, strict rules against tobacco and alcohol, would not hesitate. There are many stories of him kicking people off the team for violating rules. Probably the most famous was the great 1897 strawberry cake incident. This was the night before the national championship regatta. Remember, they're defending champs. So they go back to the national championship regatta. He catches 5 members of the varsity crew eating strawberry shortcake the night before, which is against the rules. So he kicks the 5 rowers out of the boat, fills in with 5 substitutes, and everyone goes into the regatta thinking they're gonna have a horrible performance. The next day, to everyone's surprise, they win again. Courtney said, his statement afterwards was, "I didn't expect them to win, and I was willing to lose, but I felt it was better for Cornell boys to know that they are expected to do what is right than it is for them to win a race." So that gives a little bit of the flavor of Charles Courtney. But despite despite the sternness, he was loved by his crews because he also looked out for the moral and just kind of personal development of the athletes. He was known to look for people who had not only a good physique, but high moral standards, and someone who was an excellent student. And he saw his task as forming character as well as rowing ability. In a letter in 1892, he kind of rhapsodizes about the virtues of promptness, regularity, and self-control that are learned in the sport. And he says, in almost every case, a crewman looks back on his time in the boat as one of the most pleasurable and profitable of his college courses. He also earned respect because he just had a deep love of the sport. He was known he would have kind of an afternoon tea and talk over intricacies of the rowing with the oarsmen. And whenever possible, he would get out alongside the boats himself. He would row in a single and pace alongside the eight. So he'd also been a legendary competitor himself. We'll go to the next slide. Here he is having a little more fun with some of the rowers, but you know, in the 1890s, rowing was a big front page news. Courtney had been a champion single sculler. He'd been the U.S. national champion for a number of years, and he had a series of highly publicized duels with the Canadian national champion, Ned Hanlon. There was a lot of not only spectators, but a lot of betting on the races back in those days, which led to a lot of intrigues. So probably the most famous of those were those dual races I talked about. So Courtney lost the first match up to Hanlon, and on the rematch, the day of the race, Courtney turned up sick. His supporters claimed he had been poisoned by Ned Hanlon's crew. The Hanlon supporters obviously claimed he was faking it because he thought he was going to lose again. So a crowd of about 40,000 was disappointed because there was no race. Another race was scheduled, a third one. And on the morning of the race, Courtney showed up and found that his single scull had been sawed in half. So he was unable to row. And again, Courtney's camp blamed the Hanlon people for sabotaging, and Hanlon's team said that Courtney did it himself because he was afraid he was going to lose and he wanted an excuse not to. But it was similar intrigues like that led to the kind of the downfall of rowing as a sport. The betting and cheating kind of tarnished the reputation. But we'll go to the next slide. We'll go ahead to the next slide here.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay. Yep.
There you go.
But nonetheless, rowers were kind of the sporting stars of the day. This picture is kind of typical of the kind of stylized crew photos that they would often take with the rowers striking poses. And I don't know, one can kind of imagine that if Sports Illustrated was around in 1879, that these guys would have been on the cover of the swimsuit issue for Sports Illustrated. So we'll go to the next slide. And we'll go through these pretty quick, but we'll talk about this more later. But you know, Cayuga Lake was a great rowing venue. It was home to the national championships for many years, and these next couple slides just show you the level of spectators that were along there. So we can go to the next slide. So as you can see, the Frontenac out there following the race, number of steamboats following the race. The next slide, I'll show you this was the observation car. So the railroad tracks along the East Shore. They fitted up a railroad car with bleachers that would follow the race. It was a 4-mile long race. So this way it would follow them. And then go ahead on the next slide. And you see again, just the observation car packed with people. And then the next slide shows, this is from the 30s now. You can see the cars lining the shore, and then just the shore is completely packed with people. So it's quite a sport. On to the next slide we see, so Courtney was known for being an innovator in his training methods, but he was also pretty far ahead of his time in social values. So at that time, he was the preeminent coach in the country, and he also coached women. It was only an intramural competition, but I still think that was pretty progressive at a time when most universities weren't admitting women. He was coaching them and teaching them to compete in intramural races. And the next slide, you see the women taken to the lake in their 8-oared shell. Just like the men, they were held to very high standards in their training and their dress code. And then the next slide, you see the 1903. These were the champions of the women's intramural race. And you see them kind of thumbing their nose at their coach. They're wearing suits, and they're clearly partaking of some of the forbidden things that they were not allowed to do during training. So they took this picture to kind of thumb the nose at coach, but these were the champions of the 1903 women's intramural contest. And we'll go to the next slide, the last of this section. You can just see, it's kind of this picture struck me because you can see there's boats, there's a lot of traffic, there's a bunch of people on the dock. It kind of reminds you, this was, I think, in 1912. 100 years later, it's basically the same scene. So it's been going on for all that time. So that sums up my part on the ancient history.
Thank you, Drew. Bruce? Whoops.
Bruce, I believe you're muted.
Yeah, let's try
Oh,
that.
there you go.
All right. Thank you for coming to this presentation. I look forward to speaking with you all a bit about the history of the Cascadilla Boathouse and the Cascadilla Boat Club that provides rowing to the Ithaca community. As Drew said, the history of collegiate rowing goes back to the 19th century, and Cornell was part of that very early history. Interestingly enough, the Cascadilla School, next slide, was started by two Cornell graduates, one a math and the other a classical scholar. It was also part of the 19th century rowing on Cayuga Lake. In 1893, an article in the Cornell Daily Sun, written about the plans for a newly announced Cascadilla Boathouse, stated, "Rowing is considered to be the foremost branch of athletics in the university, and it is eminently desirable that men have some knowledge of handling an oar before entering." Next slide. From 1893 until 1896, the Cascadilla School crews rowed out of Cornell's boathouse and even practiced against Cornell freshman boats, something that would not be allowed today under recruiting guidelines. Next slide. In 1893, the Cascadilla School commissioned the construction of their own boathouse at what was at the time Renwick Park. The boathouse was designed by the renowned local architectural firm of Vivian and Gibb. They performed a survey of notable boathouses in what were then the centers of rowing in America: New York City, Boston, Cambridge, Philadelphia. Next slide. Architectural reviews of boathouses at the time suggest that Vivian and Gibb were most influenced by the Weld Boathouse at Harvard University in Cambridge, Mass. that was built in 1890. The Cascadilla Boathouse was completed in 1896 with single shingle siding, much of which is still on the building today, but not for much longer, as the reshingling is currently scheduled for this summer. Next slide. The boathouse was built with 2 towers on the north corners of the building and a wraparound veranda that encompassed the entire second floor of the building. Of the towers, only the northeast one still remains. The larger western tower had an entrance from the second floor assembly room into a spiral staircase, which rose to a 3rd floor observation gallery as high as the current roof peak. That large tower may have been in place as late as 1955, although it and a majority of the veranda were removed at some point due to their deteriorated state. The only remaining portions of the veranda are on the east and south side overlooking the Stewart Park playing field and around the remaining tower on the northeast corner. You can still see signs of the supporting knees from the veranda on the east and south sides of the buildings. Cascadilla School crews rowed from the site until 1930. During that time, between 1910 and 1919, the shoreline was extended north and west of the boathouse into the lake. Even later in the early 1930s, the WPA project further extended this portion of land between Fall Creek and Cayuga Lake. Illustrations and photos of the building before the turn of the century show the original shoreline directly in front of the boat bay doors on the west end of the building, with a ramp leading right to the launching docks. The city of Ithaca then used the Ithaca Boathouse for storage until 1978. Cascadilla Boat Club was formed in 1977 and was granted use of the north bay of the boathouse in 1978. The city of Ithaca continued to use the south bay as a park maintenance shop until 1982, when the Cascadilla Boat Club was granted use of both bays. A caretaker for Stewart Park and his family occupied the 2nd floor apartment until as recently as 1987. The city still continues to use the garage space on the east end of the building, and at this time, the Ithaca Youth Bureau stores canoes in the garage space, and the park maintenance crew stores cleaning equipment for the bathrooms. The 2nd floor is currently not used at all. So that's a bit of the history of the boathouse, and we can move on to.
Steve Stowe is going to do a, Deidre Silverman wrote some, Cunningham, I'm sorry. I thought wrote some beautiful pieces on the interpretive panel, and Steve's going to tell you about this aspect of the rowing history. Steve?
Cayuga Lake's challenging open waters, combined with the unobstructed and unpredictable winds, served as both training arena and dramatic competitive theater, beginning in the 1870s with Cornell's nascent rowing program. Rowing races became popular, rowdy affairs due to rabid newspaper coverage, ubiquitous gambling, along with steamboat, ferry, and railroad advertisements. The Auburn and Ithaca branch of Lehigh Valley Railroad sold seats on observation cars with 4-tiered bleachers. A locomotive on each end pushed and pulled a line of 10 to 35 cars back and forth. Depending on a race's popularity, they often carried tens of thousands of banner-waving, screaming spectators. Contributing to the carnival atmosphere of these early races, steamboat ferries and small private boats lined the raceway with sports fans bellowing and shrieking encouragement at their favorite teams.
Drew?
Excellent. Okay. So now we skip ahead a little bit to the post-World War II era. All right, I think our first guy who kind of exemplifies the spirit of Cornell Crew here is Frank Collier. He's posing next to his craft, the Screaming Eagle. So Frank came to campus in the fall of 1941 and rowed for 1 year, but then enlisted and went and served in World War II for 3 years, along with two of his boatmates. They were all fighter pilots. Frank was shot down twice. The second time he was shot down in the ocean and spent a full day floating, waiting for rescue. He was rescued. He was then stationed on Iwo Jima right after the Allied forces took over the island, and they had pretty constant action afterwards, as there was a number of Japanese soldiers still hidden out in a series of tunnels underneath the base they had taken over, who were known to pop up at any hour of the night. So they had to be on constant guard for that time. He returned to Cornell in the fall of 45 and rejoined his teammates Henry Bartels and John Webster, and they, although they were technically underclassmen when they returned, they were technically sophomores. They had a maturity a little higher than typical student. There were a lot of kind of silly traditions that were ended with their generation about underclassmen having to perform certain duties for the upperclassmen. Well, these guys came back from war and they said, we're not doing your laundry. We're not doing any of these hazing rituals. That was the end of a lot of old traditions. But Frank Collier, his father, the boathouse is named after his father, his uncle, who gave the main gift for the current boathouse. And Frank and his uncle both were just lifelong servants to Cornell, just kind of overcoming adversity and then serving in many ways. So we'll go to the next slide. The results were kind of mixed for a few years, and Cornell really didn't hit its stride until the 50s. Let's see if I could actually do the next slide first, and then I'll come back because I got these a little out of order.
Yeah.
So this is legendary coach Harrison Stork Stanford. He came to Cornell in the late 30s. He came out of the University of Washington. He was a class of 26 graduate, so he was out of the same program that produced the boys in the boat. The Olympic champion crew in 1936. So he was a little before them, but a similar environment, but he brought that same kind of attitude and toughness to Cornell. He was known that he didn't recruit. He just drew athletes from on campus. He was notorious for standing in the freshman registration line, and Stork was about 6'6", so anyone who was near to his height, he would come up to and press upon about how they should join the crew. He was Bill Stowe, who was a Cornell graduate and Olympic gold medalist in 1960, said of Stanford, It was a very simple style. He said, we would wear down the opposition with superior conditioning, a long and exact stroke, and no trickery. His presence was commanding, fair, and comforting. And now we'll jump back. Cornell started to really hit their stride in the late 50s under Sanford. The most successful of all time was pictured here, the 57 crew. These guys were, in the way of Cornell, these were kind of a bunch of farm boys and former football players that Stork had found as freshmen and convinced to be rowers. None of them had any sort of rowing pedigree, or very few of them had any sort of pedigree, but they still went on to win the freshman event in 1954. After that, they were pretty much hooked. They stuck together. They won again as the JV crew in 1955. And then in 56, they were moved up to the varsity division. And it was, the crew pretty much stayed together that whole time. So they're very united. In 56, they had a great year again. They had an undefeated regular season and they won the national championship. Their main rivalry was against Yale. And Yale had been close to them all year. And then they met Yale again in the Olympic trials. So at that point of time, there wasn't really a separate Olympic team. Usually whatever the fastest college crews would go to the Olympic trials and they would race, and usually the crew would go intact to the Olympics. So after an undefeated season, they met Yale in the Olympic trials and they lost by 1 foot. So obviously it's a devastating loss. And then Yale went on to win the gold medal at the 1956 Olympics. So even more devastation there. But I think in a theme that will come up again and again with Cornell crews is it was how they responded to the adversity. So they had one more year. They came back in 1957 and they went on an absolute tear. They beat Yale by a huge margin in the regular season. They went undefeated, won the national championship, and then went on to the prestigious Henley Regatta in England. There again, they met Yale in the final of the Grand Challenge Cup for Henley, which is the most prestigious regatta or event at the regatta. And there they again bested Yale by open water, which is a large margin for rowing. And so it was a sweet revenge for the 1957 crew, but they're generally remembered as just the pinnacle, I think, of Cornell rowing, probably the best crew we've ever put out. The next slide we'll see here, and the success continued after that. They won again in 58 and also in 1962 and 63. And at the height of the fame, Cornell was featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So the 1876 guys didn't get their shot on the cover, but 1962 we finally got it. So on the next slide is now we're looking at the lightweight rowing program. So lightweight rowing is for rowers who are under 150 pounds. It was a category made to expand it, so it wasn't just 6'6" freaks of nature who were rowing, but normal sized people would be involved in the sport as well. This picture always struck me. This is the 1962 Eastern Sprints Championship. So there's a 3-way tie between Cornell, Navy, and MIT. And I just remember seeing this as a freshman at Cornell, walking in the boathouse and seeing this and thinking it was just outlandish, in a time of, precision timing and down to the decimal splits. And it was just funny that here it is, 3-way tie, and the officials just threw their hands up and said, okay, it's a 3-way tie. But anyway, so the 62 guys had the tie, and then Cornell seemed to take it personally. They went on a tear after that. So in 1963, they won the title outright. They went on a streak of 5 years of undefeated or not losing a dual race. They won the title in 63, 64, and 65. They went second into Harvard in 66, and then in 67, again, the Cornell guys were unhappy about losing in 66, and they took it out personally. We'll go to the next slide. And again, in 67, they came back with a vengeance. Here they are winning again, going to the prestigious Henley Regatta. Here they are winning the final by open water, a huge margin. So that'd be a blowout win. But yeah, the 67 crew became kind of the standard bearers for all lightweight rowing.
Thank you, Drew. My turn, just for a little bit about the rowing course. And many of you know this, the rowing course is in the flood control channel. Ithaca has a history of flooding. 1935 was the big one. And like many things in Ithaca, it took a really long time to actually build the solution to it in around 1970 when the flood channel was done. But this 35 event was kind of a game changer and really slowly but surely led to the development of the flood channel. But this is before. So you can see here, this is the boatyard grill right here. This is really the end of the Erie Canal, this area, and also down at Buffalo Street. This is the inlet. And the flood channel was cut through this neighborhood. This was an era of, in the late 60s, of urban renewal. And it was a neighborhood that I guess was not valued at the time. And so they removed a lot of houses. I mean, that was an area when the Commons was done as well. So some good came of it, but it certainly had an impact culturally at the time. But now we have an Olympic rowing course, caliper rowing course, and you can see it located here as shown on the interpretive panel. And it's sort of, rowing on the lake was very challenging, certainly. And I think this is a much better solution, a much better place. And now that the waterfront trail is in place, which is a great place to watch and track the rowing, it works out really well for viewing all of these wonderful races. So now we're going to turn to Becky, and she's going to tell us about Ithaca College.
So can you just go to the next slide?
Yep.
So Ithaca College rowing began as an idea among students in 1967. There was a conversation between Robert Jones, class of 70, and President Howard Dillingham. Other seniors that year, Al Clifford, Tom Price, John McCauley, and Bill Nustek signed on. President Dillingham was surprisingly receptive, and then in the fall of 1968, behind grad student coach Gary Kilpatrick, the first strokes were taken. In this photo, the crew stands proud with the diagonal striped oars. Next photo. The diagonal stripes of the first blade design morphed into the wide blue diagonal stripe that is still used on the Ithaca oars today. This photo includes 3 local Ithacans. Second from the left is Tom Ambrose. Third from the right is Jerry Dietz. And second from the right is Steve Lahr, a longtime professor at Ithaca College. Young Gary Kilpatrick reached out to local businessmen and secured space at the Carl Yengel's beer warehouse, in which they used to row out of. And that is actually shown in the background of this photo. Yengo had 2 rules for the rowers. First rule was move the truck out of the way before practice and put it back. And 2 was don't touch the beer. Next slide. There's mention of purchasing boat racks in Gary Kilpatrick's early recollection. In this photo, I see oarsmen are storing equipment on such outdoor racks. It's unclear if these racks were outside the Yengo warehouse or at the site of the soon-to-be IC Boathouse. Next slide. The first equipment came from Cornell head coach Stork Stanford, who loaned oars and 2 rowing shells, the Teagle and the Fraser, to the new Ithaca crew. By 1975, the program had grown to 45 oarsmen under head coach Bob Tallman. Next slide. In February 1973, some of Haskell Davidson's closest friends met with Ithaca College officials to discuss creating a memorial in honor of the late Mr. Davidson. Because of Mr. Davidson's interest in area sports, his friends decided to help the college build a boathouse for the growing crew program. $60,000 was raised, and that permitted the college to start construction. Groundbreaking took place in September 1973, and the building was completed in the spring of 1974. In this photo, President Phillips is giving the remarks at the boathouse dedication on April 20th. Next slide. I really like this photo because it shows the different architecture and the different kind of waterfront location. The Haskell-Davidson Boathouse sits in the same location as the current IC Boathouse. It's really amazing to see how the shoreline and waterfront has changed. The dedication program reads, thanks to the generosity of so many friends, Ithaca College now boasts one of the finer small college rowing facilities in the East. Of steel and concrete block construction on a floating slab, the Davidson Boathouse will hold 12 8-oared shells comfortably. It has a spacious work and repair area and room between the storage racks for a shell trailer or to store shells for visiting crews. Next photo. The Robert Tallman Rowing Center, Ward Romer Boathouse, was completed in the fall of 2012. It was a year-long construction project, which coincided with the first discovery of hydrilla that shut down the inlet that fall season. The Ithaca crews actually spent much of that year rowing from the Cascadilla Boathouse and were much appreciative. The new boathouse came at a cost of $2.6 million, a far cry from $60,000 several years ago. This is truly a top-notch facility for our athletes and coaches. We have many donors to thank for this amazing facility. The Ward Romer Boathouse houses actually doubles the equipment storage than the original Haskell-Davidson Boathouse. Next photo. Moving back in time to the new Haskell-Davidson Boathouse, if you build it, they will come. And the women did, starting in 1975. Women's crew started as a club sport and became varsity in 1982. After several inconsistent years, Coach Jocelyn Curing guided Ithaca women's varsity to the first of two, what is now 34 consecutive winning seasons. Next photo. The first women's NCAA championship rowing regatta was held in 1997. A women's four from Ithaca qualified for the all-division event in Sacramento, California. Mary Obadinsky, class of 97 and a member of that crew, went on to win a silver medal at in the women's double at the 1999 Pan Am Games in Winnipeg, Canada. Next photo. The first NCAA championship held exclusively for Division III teams was in 2002. 2 years later, Ithaca made its mark with back-to-back national championships. A member of both years' varsity 8 is Ithaca's most famous and decorated alumni, Megan Musnicki, a class of 05, who went on to win gold in the 2010, 11, 13, 14, and 15 World Championships. And in between, she brought home Olympic gold in 2012 and then again in 2016. Next photo. Ithaca Rowing turned 50 in 2018, a celebration weekend brought together two crews of 40 years. Competing under the status of club in 1976, the Bombers captured the Dad Vale title in the Varsity 8. This was the first year women raced at the Dad Vale, and also the first year women raced the distance of 2,000 meters. They are in boat order in the back row with their coach, Jerry Dietz, on the left. Jerry was a member of a bronze winning men's heavyweight 8 as an undergraduate. In 2016, I decided it would be kind of fun to go after winning the Dad Vale again. So 40 years later, after the first win in 1976, we set the goal, we named our boat the Spirit of 76, and we went on to win the 2016 Dad Vale Regatta. Next photo. The history of rowing at Ithaca College includes pride, family, dedication, and a commitment to excellence. I've mentioned a few of our alums, and on the men's side, our most recent success story is Eric Frid, class of 16, who competed at 2 world championships and was training for the 2020 Olympics until it was postponed last summer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becky. Andrea is going to tell you about our Centennial Challenge. And by the way, today is Andrea's birthday, so wish her a quiet, happy birthday.
Thank you, Rick. Can you see me? Am I?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great. So Cascadilla Boathouse, and on a larger scale, Stewart Park, has been a home base for generations of young rowers. The park opens up athletic and recreational opportunities to so many people in our area. And right now we are running a community-wide effort to support Stewart Park and to maintain the future of these opportunities. We're calling this the Mayor Stewart Centennial Challenge. So just a little background. Before Stewart Park opened, Ithaca's Mayor Stewart made a $150,000 gift to prepare the park to best serve the public. 100 years later, we are on the precipice of Stewart Park's centennial, and Stewart Park needs more restoration, it needs more preservation, and it needs more modernization. So this is where I ask you to think about all those wonderful memories you have of Stewart Park or of rowing, and then to get involved. So in order to help the park thrive as it enters its second century, Friends of Stewart Park is leading a grassroots level effort to restore Mayor Stewart's $150,000 gift. This community-wide effort can only succeed through widespread participation. So here's how we achieve this goal. Together, 1,500 people and families, you, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, can work together to restore Mayor Stewart's $150,000 gift by each making just a $100 gift. And right now it's really exciting. So momentum is growing. We have 137 community members right now who have already joined the Centennial Challenge. You can see a bunch of their names listed there on the screen right now. And we're really excited to watch the challenge support just grow from here. So I want to ask you to join this community-wide effort to support the future of Stewart Park. You can become part of this challenge by visiting www.stewartpark.org/challenge. You can see it on the screen there. And I'll put the link in the chat if someone hasn't already. And you can also join by calling the Friends of Stewart Park office phone. We'll have it open for the next hour or so. And that number I'll also put in the chat, and you can see it on the screen now. That is 607-319-4766. If you have already joined the challenge, I want to encourage you also to reach out to us and ask how you can be involved and support the challenge more, because this really is a grassroots level effort, and it can only spread from neighbor to neighbor, from friend to friend. And since we aren't asking for large multi-$1,000 gifts, this effort can only succeed with each community member having the opportunity to join. And that can only happen if we're really giving people the opportunity to join by talking with them and letting them know that this is happening. So go ahead if you can and make your way to the website. We would love to have you join the Centennial Challenge. That's it from me.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Drew, you're back.
Okay, we'll pick up in the late 70s and pick up with talking about the women's crew. So unfortunately, despite having an early history of women's rowing was discontinued from the 30s until the 70s. So here's a picture of the 1980 crew, one of the first of the women's crews. They were, again, distinguished in having the Cornell spirit of grittiness and fighting adversity. They, at first, were not taken seriously. They were given just hand-me-down equipment from the men's crews. If you've ever tried to, oars really have to fit to your hands, and women tend to have smaller hands than men. So if you ever tried to use a giant knife that's way too big for you, you might imagine how difficult it is to row with equipment that isn't set for you. So they did a lot. They had to fight a lot to get the right kind of equipment. At the time, for the first few years, they didn't have showers at the boathouse or locker facilities. And really minimal funding. The story is that their first coach was also part-time and was also a truck driver. to make ends meet. So they really had to fight a lot in the early days. Despite that, we'll go to the next slide, and they had a number of really successful rowers come out of that. There was a Cornell rower in the first ever women's 8 at the 1976 Olympics. They had one member in there. Here's a picture. This is Stephanie Maxwell Pearson with her partner. She was a bronze medalist at the 92 Olympics. She also rowed in 88 in the women's 8. So yeah, a number of successful rowers there. On our next slide, we come into, this is Cornell really hit their stride in the late 80s. Coach John Dunn came in and really instilled a great spirit in the crew, got them competing at the national level. They built up over the years, kind of slowly gaining speed. And then in 1989, they won the national championship. Again, they're very much kind of underdogs and upstarts. No one expected them to win at the time. Most of the rowers had not rowed before college, which again was becoming even more rare. So most of them were just walk-ons who'd been picked up at the swim test or the freshman registration line, and they went from having never rowed before to winning the national title. Andrea Thies, who was in the boat class of '89, went on to row in the Olympics in 92 and 96, if I have my dates right. I think she kind of best exemplifies the athletic background. In an article, she said, she never rowed growing up, but she spent a lot of time with her family camping and hunting and fishing. And she says, my athleticism came from running around in the woods, but it served me in rowing. So, but we'll go on to the next slide. And this is the new the boathouse as it stands today. It was modernized in 2010 and expanded. The main part of the boathouse that you can see is still the same as it was from 1957. But I think the athlete's favorite part was the renovation included a chocolate milk dispenser, which has a Cornell dairy chocolate milk, which they can take part of after a workout. And I'd also say it should be noted that one of the major things, unfortunately, it wasn't until 2010 that the women's locker facilities were fully upgraded to the same standard as the men. They got lockers in the 80s, but they were not as good of a locker room until that. So I would say now our facility probably boasts the most square footage of any boathouse in our league. Having been a coach in Boston for 5 years, I really appreciate just the sheer amount of space we have here. It's completely unprecedented. And then on to the final slide. So, in recent years, or the final couple slides, in recent years, the success of Cornell Crew has really been through the lightweight boats. Here is the 2006 Crew winning the Eastern Sprints Championship. They'd go on to win the national title in 6, 7, and 8. And again, another story about them was, I was rowing in the early 2000s. At that time, Cornell was not doing well. I remember it was 2002, I believe. We raced Yale at Yale. We were swept quite a bit, and then at the next, this was probably 3 years later, Yale was supposed to travel to Cornell to race Cornell, and they decided it wasn't worth their time to make the trip. A bit of a snub there. And then these guys pictured the next year, they said, okay, they traveled back to Yale and beat them on their home course, and then went on to win the national championship. So again, Cornell Crew's kind of always exemplifying that the spirit of just bouncing back from adversity and just fighting again. So and then the Cornell lightweight crews also won the national championships in 2014, 15, 17, and 19. So it's quite a run of success. We'll go on to the last slide. We haven't been able to compete in either 2020 or 2021 due to COVID, but here's just a picture of the women taking to the lake, and we're looking forward to, it's been a good 150 years so far. We're looking forward to another 150 years of success.
There's a few more lake shots here we can go through quickly, Drew.
Yeah, and we'll go through a few pictures. Here's Here's one of the men's crews. So as they talked about, the lake is our best friend and worst enemy. It can be beautiful and glass flat, or it can be stormy. A little story about the Ira Regatta was held on Lake Cayuga for a number of years. It was a 4-mile long regatta, so they really had to have good conditions. If they showed up on the race was supposed to be on a Saturday and the lake was choppy, they'd wait until Saturday night and they'd try it again Saturday night and when the wind died down. And if it was still choppy Saturday night, they'd wait until Sunday morning. And then if it's still, they would just wait it out. Our coach, I was just talking to our current coach, Todd Kennett, who said even when he was in college, he remembers racing on Lake Onondaga in Syracuse, and they just kept pushing it back. They were supposed to race at 4 p.m. and they ended up pushing the race back about 3 hours, and they were just waiting for the wind to die down. So anyway, we'll go to the next one. Here's the women's crew. This was from 2019 practicing, and you can see Cornell in the background. It's just some beautiful scenery. And here we are. This was actually the final row of 2019. So this was, I think, March 11th, 2019. We learned that, Cornell would be going virtual. The season would be canceled. We got permission to have one last practice in the boathouse. The guys in the yellow boat in foreground were seniors. So this was their last this was their last ever practice at Cornell. Here's some of the new generation. These are some of our freshman rowers this year. If you look closely, you can see they're wearing masks. So we've been able to practice this year in as long as we are wearing masks. And then let's see, we've got one or two more, right? And here's a nice shot we had. This is looking towards the west shore, probably about 2 miles up the lake. So this is actually on the old IRA course. This is about probably a mile from the finish. So we always like to point those out.
Thank you, Drew. Bruce, you want to talk about the boat club?
Yeah. So as I said, the Cascadilla Boat Club is a not-for-profit organization founded in 1977 with the mission of making the sport of rowing available to the entire Ithaca area community. The board of directors, we have a paid general manager who's responsible for guidance and operation of the club. We have several different programs that are run during the year, approximately 8 months of on-the-water activities and 4 months of winter training. In addition, when rowing practices are not running, there's 120 feet of stable dock at the end of the Stewart Park that's available to the community from April through October for the public to use to launch kayaks for fishing or just to relax. Next slide, that slide, that's good. Cascadilla Boat Club, go back to the guys for a second.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Cascadilla Boat Club provides programs for a wide range of rowers. The largest group of participants is high school students, usually 60 to 90, primarily from Ithaca, participate in a competitive scholastic program during the fall and spring season. In non-COVID times, scholastic practices are scheduled 5 days a week, either before or after school, depending on the skill level. Races against other clubs happen throughout the year, throughout New York State and as far away as Philadelphia, Buffalo, or Saratoga Springs on the weekends. Next slide. In the fall, students participate in a program that focuses on bringing new students into the club. Fundamental rowing skills are taught to novices in the fall, while the varsity rowers focus on fine-tuning their technique, improving their aerobic base, and preparing themselves for the fall head race season of 2.5 to 3 mile races. Spring is the sprint season for rowers when athletes row 1,500 to 2,000 meter races. The novices feel more at home in the boats, and all the crews focus on how to get the most out of an 8 or a 4 athletes working in perfect unison. A race course can have as many as 6 of the 60-foot-long shells racing side by side for 5 minutes at full power. Next slide. The resulting feeling of accomplishment by those athletes, win or lose, is something that every crew parent sees and feels themselves with nearly as much pride as their child. Some of our rowers have found crew to be their first successful athletic experience. something they can take with them for the rest of their lives. For those who did not excel at the specific skills of the turf, the gym, or rink-based sports, Crew provides a high level of conditioning and team skill to its participants. The sport of rowing has grown dramatically over the last 2.5 decades and is no longer considered to be a sport only for the wealthy. Next slide. Cascadilla Boat Club has provided financial support to nearly half of its participants in order to broaden access to this sport as well as to the Ithaca waterfront. Crew is widely perceived as a training ground for dedicated athletes, and colleges take note of scholastic rowers. They're recognized for having the maturity to make a commitment to their teammates as well as their academic endeavors. Cascadilla Boat Club makes an effort to work with college-bound students and their parents to provide guidance and support during the college application process. Next slide. Adult Learn to Row is a program available to the community over the summer and usually has 2 sessions that run 2 mornings or evenings per week over about 4 weeks. The adult program focuses on safety and comfort around the water using stabilized training boats. It also develops small boat skills, generally in 1 or 2 or 4 rowers per boat. The objective is to provide a point of access to the waterfront for people of all skill levels. Following a month of training, adult rowers who continue rowing do so because of the camaraderie, low impact exercise, and of course, because of their access to the lakefront beauty. Next slide. Adult Learn to Row programs, that's good enough. Programs attract 10 to 15 people for each session. It was one of the classes in 20 years ago that I first got into a rowing show. Cascadilla Boat Club's effort to promote a culture of excellence within the club and its program is at the core of its mission of making the sport of rowing available for the entire Ithaca area community. Training programs are based on an appreciation of good physical conditioning and developing a lifelong love of the sport of rowing. We focus on developing a strong sense of responsibility for our fellow rowers, the boats and equipment we use, and the public face of Cascadilla Boat Club that our masters and scholastic rowers take to their competition. Point of reference about this photograph, by the way, I'm 6 feet tall and I'm standing up fully straight. Our alumni take this culture of excellence onto their college rowing careers. Over the years, we've had alumni who have been team captains at Stanford, Harvard, Colby, just to name a few. In fact, one of the guidance counselors at Ithaca High School was contacted by a coach from a Division I rowing program on the West Coast who asked if Ithaca had any more students like the 2 rowers he had recently added to his team from Ithaca High School at Cascadilla Boat Club. And finally, we would be remiss if we did not mention several Cascadilla Boat Club alumni who've rowed or are currently rowing at the highest level of international competition. Next slide. Caryn Davies rowed, that's her in the stroke seat to the left with the sunglasses. I guess they all got sunglasses. Caryn has rowed to the US national team for a number of years and is currently back with the US women training with an eye towards Tokyo. She holds an Olympic silver medal from the 2004 Games in Athens. She then stroked the US women's 8 to a gold medal at the 2007 World Championships in Munich. And the following year in the 2008 Beijing Olympics, she again stroked the US women's 8 to a gold. She joined the US boat again for the London Olympics in 2012, winning another gold medal. Next slide. So both Andrew and Caryn in this picture have their Beijing medals. On the guys' side, Andrew Byrnes also won a gold medal in the run-up to the Beijing Olympics in Munich in 2007. Next slide. The Canadian boat also went on the following year to win their gold medal in Beijing. And then 4 years later, at London 2012 Olympics, Andrew was again in the Canadian men's 8. This time they won a silver medal. Next slide. This picture was from the winter before the London Olympics. Shows a third Cascadilla rower on the right, Jake Cornelius, who rowed in that same London Olympics in 2012 with the US men's 8 against Andrew, who was with Canada. The US boat finished 4th, just out of the medals, by a scant 0.3 of a second. And then there's the Storied boat race, which has been a competition between Oxford and Cambridge over 4 miles of the River Thames in London, England for the past 166 years. Although it was not held this past year due to COVID, the event has regularly boasted attendance to watch the event of over 250,000 spectators. In April 2007, Jake Cornelius rowed on the Cambridge University boat, which won the boat race that year. And then in 2015, the 70th women's boat race, which had also been held for many years, obviously, also between Oxford and Cambridge, rowed on the Thames course for the first time. And Caryn, who was studying at Oxford at the time, was the stroke steed again, as the Oxford boat took a 6.5 length lead to win that race. Individually, these 3 alumni have made the choice to compete at the highest levels of rowing. But more importantly, they provide role models for the high school students and the adult members of the Cascadilla Boat Club. They're a reflection of our policy of a broad community-wide involvement and our commitment of a culture of excellence, which has produced rowers that are successful at the highest elite Olympic level. Given our relative small size and non-urban location, this level of success is quite unique. And we're honored to be able to say that they started their rowing careers at the Cascadilla Boat Club.
Thank you, Bruce. Andrew, you still with us?
Yes, I am with you. Sorry, I just had to get off mute
No
there.
problem. We have a couple of images here, and if you'd like to say a few words, we'd be pleased.
First of all, I've got my kids with me in the background. You know how COVID and Zoom meetings go these days.
We love it.
But I will say, I really appreciated my time at Cascadilla, and I think the club is quite unique. Being right on the lake there, I didn't have a lot of involvement with Cayuga Lake, despite living in Ithaca for about 15 years until I started rowing. And it's really a unique facility, a unique spot, and a way to get people in the community involved with the lake, and really enhances the vibrancy of the interaction of the community with the lake, to have things like rowing clubs and Stewart Park with a beautiful waterfront access. So it's a great place, and I'm really pleased to have been able to spend so much time rowing at the boat club.
Thank you. You still rowing these days, or?
Not too much anymore. No.
Why is that? I wonder. Well, congratulations on the young ones.
Thank you.
The rowers here with you.
This is we're looking at photos of our 4 that I competed in high school. This is a couple of my rowers. Doug Bishop, Max Tam, I think, is in that boat. And I can't remember who the 4th person is. If I can make the screen bigger.
Yeah, I know you sent it from your phone.
Yeah, Richard.
Great.
I forget his last name.
That's okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And there you are. What's the? Tell us about this. I think this is the last shot for you.
Yeah, this is just our 2012 medalist crew in London with our medals after the race. I will say that I started my rowing career fairly late in high school, late in high school, and didn't really get recruited anywhere to any universities. I applied to a few Ivy Leagues, but the rowing coaches didn't think I was good enough to get in or make their top list. So I ended up going to a smaller Division III college, rowing there, having a great experience, and then got more and more into rowing with the national teams once I was out of university. So.
Cool.
And it led to this shot here.
Oh, congratulations. Okay, Caryn,
So I want to talk for a moment about serendipity. I want you all to think of a time, think back through your life. Was there ever any moment when a chance encounter with a single person changed the course of your life? Is there any one person who you can say his or her influence made you who you are today? I can say that about Jan Rogovich, also known as Rogi. He coached at Cascadilla Boat Club for many years. He's actually one of the founding members. When I was about 12 years old, I was at the PNC up on East Hill with my father, and this big kind of gruff man strode up purposefully, and he pointed at me like Uncle Sam, and he said, "I want you for rowing." And I was terrified, and I hid behind my father. But he explained that he was the coach at the local boat club. And because at 12 years old, I was about 6 foot tall already, he could tell that I had the potential to be a stellar oarswoman. And that moment, that chance encounter, changed the rest of my life. I started rowing at Cascadilla, found I was quite good at it, got recruited for college, went and rowed at Harvard, and as you've heard, rowed for 3 Olympic teams. That made me who I am. I also want to talk for a moment about community. Think now on your life, think of all the people who have supported you and helped you become, again, who you are. With Team USA, we talk about the team behind the team. That means the family, the friends, maybe the teammates back at your home rowing club who helped you get all the way to the Olympics. And I would like to take this moment to recognize everyone at Cascadilla Boat Club who helped me get to where I am. And it's not just that I started rowing at Cascadilla, it's not just that I competed there in high school. Even later in life, I continued and do continue to receive support from Cascadilla. For example, the first time we were told on the national team to bring singles in 2003. The coaches at Cascadilla Boat Club, I want to say, Drew, I think you were involved in that, helped me get a loaner single from Hudson that I could bring down. And then last year, when COVID hit and the national team disbanded, I drove home to Ithaca, rejoined Cascadilla Boat Club, and spent the summer trying to beat Drew in a single. He was a great training partner. And then I even got to borrow the single that I rode last summer, brought it here to Princeton and rode it against my teammates here in Princeton. So Cascadilla Boat Club, the community in Ithaca, has really made me who I am. And I want to say thank you.
That's great. Thank you for those inspiring words. We appreciate it. And what are we looking at in this image?
That is after we won our gold medal in 2012 in London. So it's a tradition to throw the coxswain in the water when you win. And there was actually another picture of one of the Cornell crews doing that. So this is us tossing our coxswain in the water, and I'm there in the middle. And I almost went in the water too after her, just because I lost my balance. But I had the foresight to take off my medal before we did that, because you don't want to go in the water and lose your medal.
No, definitely not. Okay, well, thank you very much, Caryn and Andrew. We really appreciate you taking the time, and it's a great fitting way to almost end our presentation. So there may be some questions, if you don't mind, maybe scanning the Q&A and see if anyone has any questions. We should probably keep moving in the interest of time. So thank you. So just really briefly, we did mention it, and I'm just going to go through it quickly because it's getting a bit late, but we're very excited about the work that Friends of Stewart Park and Historic Ithaca and the city have done to raise the funding to restore the exterior of the boathouse. There's been a lot of work building up to it. The city put a roof on a few years ago. There have been various volunteer efforts, but it's a the world's most complicated paint job, basically. And it's about a $500,000 project that Historic Ithaca is managing for the city. And there's a contractor hired, and the work will be starting very soon. And we hope that it will be finished by September. And you know, it's functioned great. It's wonderful that it's still functioning as a boathouse. But it's been a bit of an eyesore to some of us. And I think we're really excited just to begin to bring it back to its original beauty, because it's such an incredible building, and it is the only building on the National Register. So we're very excited about that. Here's some of the architectural plans. And so it's a great thing. And Janelle, I think, is going to close it out here for us really quickly.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. As promised in the Facebook posts and stuff, we get to vote on your favorite silly photo from the turn of the century and before. So I think there is an opportunity for you to vote down at the bottom, maybe. Which one you prefer, the women's team dressed in drag or the men basking in the sun? It's interesting. It makes me wonder just if they knew they were being silly or if they're just actually that full of themselves. But if everyone can vote, and then we will have Natasha put up the results as soon as we can here. And we have our book giveaway. We have, let's see here.
I think we should just announce the winners. And
Yep. The most beautiful thing. Our winner is Ashim Dada. And the Rise of Cornell Rowing goes to Carol Mallison. Carol Mallison, if you're with us, you won this book. And the Boys in the Boat, for our name, goes to Harriet and Frank Becker. Harriet,
right.
Frank. And if you won and you don't know Rick well, just put your information in the chat and I will take that from you. I would like to again thank everyone who participated tonight. Oh, the girls in drag won by a long shot. That was great. Thank you everyone for voting. So thank you to Andrea, Steve, Natasha, Rick, Drew, Becky, Bruce, Andrew, Caryn, and thank you for coming out. Thanks to our sponsors, Cargill Salt, Bousquet Holstein, Wegmans, Hancock Estabrook, La Terrell Parkitects, Tatum Engineering, City Harbor, M&T Bank, CFP Management, and Home Depot. If you would like to participate in our next event, it is this Saturday. We are doing landscaping and cleanup in the park. Bring your rake, 10 to noon, meet over by the new playground. And our next virtual event is going to be the Stewart Park Revitalization Public Meeting. It's changed the date to June 9th. So that's going to be on June 9th. You can come to the meeting and tell us what you want to see improved in Stewart Park, what you think should be the future. And then at the end of June, we've got a really cool event going on with the Trees of Stewart Park. So again, if you would like to join the Mayor Stewart Challenge, you can do that at stewartpark.org/challenge. And if you'd like to become a Centennial sponsor, you can email info@stewartpark.org. Thanks for coming, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.